Chapter 4. Monday, August 5, 2002, 7:51 p.m. Vanessa had expressed to Peter her desire for him, and she did not intend to be denied. She leaned across the desk and, in the blink of a mascara-tainted teary eye, firmly grasped his tie. She stared deep into his soul. With a firm tug, she started him forward. He dithered and insincerely suggested, "This may not be the right thing to do. Why don't we take a moment and consider the totality of the situation?" She replied,
I already have. I've decided, if Cyrus is going to treat me like a criminal, I might as well commit the crime.
Undaunted by Peter's feeble resistance, Vanessa tugged harder at his tie, pulling him closer and closer, until her lips met his. Instantly, the chemistry that flowed between them was wonderful. Peter quickly rushed around the desk and whisked Vanessa back in the chair. He bit down on his lip as he slowly shook his head. He glared longingly into her beautiful face. She nodded her head, up and down, urging him to continue. As he drew closer, Vanessa flung her left leg over one armrest and in the same motion, turned and arched her back over the other. She tilted her head back, as far as it would go. The leather seat cushion squealed as she slid downward. He pressed his palms into her shoulders and firmly pinned her in place. She whispered,
Take me, Peter. Do what you want with me.
Peter knelt down next to Vanessa and, ever so deliberately, began to stroke the calf of her leg. He slowly worked his hand up past her knee. She moaned as he caressed her tenderly, alternating from inner thigh to inner thigh. Before long, he clawed desperately at her stingy thong. Peter clumsily pulled and tugged, trying to remove her camisole. With her assistance, he finally managed to raise it over her head. He flung it to the floor. Lingeringly, he stared at her perky breast. He found these comely fleshly mounds truly delightful to behold. He leaned over and pressed his face into Vanessa's warm stomach, guided by the fresh scent of her perfume. Poisoned by Yves Saint Laurent. He followed his nose, and nuzzled his face upwards. Peter tenderly explored her warm body in search of erogenous zones. He didn't have to wonder. Every time he hit Peter, her verbal affirmations were unmistakable and clear. Monday, 7:53 p.m. If you were to simply listen to Harry, you would think Catherine was extremely old. In fact, she was only 58, which really isn't that old at all. But, in all fairness to the truth, she hadn't aged well. Over the years, her face had become one big wrinkle. The stroke left her hunched over and her speech slurred. Catherine looked funny, walked funny, talked funny. As she moved about during the night, her plagued bones creaked loudly, and made creepy noises that resounded and made their house seem haunted. Harry, who, by the way, was 11 years younger, spoke of Catherine as though she were ancient. Like she was a walking, talking mummy. With cobwebs hanging from her tired, sticky old bones. He was afraid to touch her dry, wrinkled, pasty white skin. He feared it would peel off in his hands, allowing maggots to creep out from within. No matter how disgusting Catherine's physical appearance may have been, Harry needed her. He needed her like a child needs a mother. She was stable and reassuring. She was a safe port during the aftermath of the most challenging storm of his life. Monday, 8:03 p.m. A man tentatively identified as James Tunney of Boston, a family man by preliminary accounts, was in a Chicago police interrogation room. He was naked except for his bloody boxer shorts. The rest of his bloody clothes were squished inside an evidence bag in the nearby police lab. Tunney was seated against the far wall, upon a long metal bench with his hands cuffed between his bare thighs. As an added precaution, the handcuffs on his wrists were secured through the thick steel rings, permanently welded to that heavy bench. A horde of high-ranking detectives carefully watched. From a relatively safe distance, as a nervous rookie patrolman obliged the detainee's request for a drink of water. They had no idea what he was capable of, and they weren't taking any chances. The detectives were poised to shoot to kill, upon the slightest provocation.
Note from the author.
Now, you must believe me, I would be the last person on earth to encourage police brutality, police misconduct, or vigilantism. Under calm and sober circumstances, I don't ordinarily advocate that paramilitary personnel exercise violence against any human being. As a rule, I believe that police should be law-abiding and adhere to proper protocol. But in this case, I think it would probably have been best for all of humanity if each of those detectives had taken out their service pistols and fired multiple shots into each and every one of this man's vital organs, killing him dead. Double dead.
The detainee lifted his head. The disarmed patrolman, careful to remain outside of his restricted reach, stretched and carefully placed the rim of the styrofoam cup to his lips. He tilted it forward. As James Tunney gulped, his narrow protruding Adam's apple repeatedly lumped and unlumped. The attending detective spied intently. Chicago police had responded to an emergency call from Jack's Diner. A greasy spoon. Near downtown. When they arrived, they found a bloody mess. 11 people were massacred. The man in custody, the alleged James Tunney, was the only survivor. When found, he appeared to be delirious. He was soaked in blood but, otherwise, unharmed. The police found a vulgar satanic message scribbled upon the diner wall. It was a frightening, horrible scene to say the least. This was the kind of thing the mayor and his advisors feared would occur when the secret society of Satan came to town. The police had read James Tunney his Miranda rights. He had exercised his option to have a lawyer present during questioning. An ABA pool attorney had been summoned and was on the way. The police were waiting with bated breath to ask several burning questions. The chief question: why would anyone murder and butcher 11 other people and leave you there, alive? James finished his drink of water. The patrolman removed the cup from his lips and, unashamedly, got away as quickly as he possibly could. He fearfully glanced back over his shoulder as he scampered. Monday, 8:06 p.m. Rishi looked regal as she strolled the interconnected catwalk, back to her war room throne. Next, the council would listen to the presentation of General Fotard. This flamboyantly gay technocrat was bitterly opposed to Rishi's mission. The council rules of debate allotted both Rishi and Fotard 2.5 hours to present their respective cases. Her total presentation had taken just 52 minutes. It was a safe bet that Fotard would utilize every second of the time afforded him. His strategy was to engage in a filibuster and make it impossible for the Supreme Council to vote on her proposal before the mission launch deadline. The IDCC computer geeks had promised Rishi that they would tweak the mission timeline and attempt to extend the launch deadline by at least a few minutes. If successful, they would post an instant message on the digital monitor board. Rishi had been watching the DMB and, thus far, there had been no such message. She wondered why in the first place SAPS leaders felt the need to hold a hearing to decide something so elementary. Members of SAPS had taken a pledge to do whatever was necessary to stop the society. Therefore, they had an obligation to act to prevent this momentous ceremony. If SAPS went forward and eliminated the society's brain trust, the opposition probably couldn't regroup or recover to convene another ceremony for several years. There was no doubt in Rishi's mind that this action was necessary to protect the souls of the innocent children who were unequivocally at risk. Monday, 8:10 p.m. Peter forcefully pressed Vanessa's right shoulder into the wooden armrest of the office chair. She loved it. He relentlessly peppered her neck and collarbone with long, acute kisses. That action seemed to drive her wild. Vanessa moaned more loudly than before. Her rapid breathing became heavier and heavier. Neither of them had ever been in a higher state of arousal. Their passion intensified. Vanessa took her right hand and firmly grasped the back of Peter's head. She dug her fingernails into his scalp. Unaccustomed to being dominated by a woman, he offered token resistance. They briefly struggled. She prevailed. She pulled his face past hers and stuck her hot, wet tongue into his ear. Peter lost all will to resist. He wondered if he had died and gone to heaven. She pulled his head upwards until their lips were reunited. They kissed wildly and passionately. She sucked on his face like a frenzied savage. When he pulled away, her blood-red lipstick was smeared all over his face and chin. Vanessa quickly forced his lips back down to her shoulder. He nibbled on her neck, as she persistently tugged at the crotch of his pants. She pleaded.
Right. Harder.
Peter obliged, and sank his teeth deep into the nape of her neck. She panted and moaned louder than ever. With the agility of a contortionist, she sank deeper into the chair. Vanessa proved to be even sexier and more exciting than Peter had ever imagined. She frantically pawed and slapped at his chest. She grabbed hold of the front of his shirt. It was wet from perspiration. She snarled like a tiger and yanked. The shirt ripped open. The ivory white buttons tumbled, end over end, until they hit the floor. Peter watched in slow motion. As they bounced, scattered and rattled to a stop on the parquet floor, near the edge of the plush green rug. The two were consumed in fiery passion, and all reserve was lost. They interacted freely, lustfully, desperately. At times, quasi-violently, events began to unfold too rapidly for words. Finally, they crossed the line, beyond the point of no return. Monday, 8:12 p.m. General Fotard leisurely sashayed along the catwalk, high above SAP's war room floor. He was superbly attired in a baggy suit, artfully designed to hide his portly physique. His white silk slacks and knee-length jacket flowed and accentuated his exaggerated feminine gestures. As the DMV's multicolored light beams danced off of him, his puffy bleached blonde hair appeared to constantly change hue. Fatard looked like the cowardly lion caught in a kaleidoscope. SAP's Supreme Council waited patiently for the start of his presentation. Finally, he began with a bold promise.
Distinguished members of the Council, I will make it clear, beyond a phantom of a doubt, that Rishi's plan to wreck a Chicago Metro commuter train in an attempt to kill 7 society leaders is foolish, reckless, and will not serve the intended purpose.
He then began to elaborate. Fatard knew that time was his friend, so he spoke slowly and deliberately. He figured that by the time his 2.5 hours were up, the members of the Supreme Council would take a short recess. After the recess, they would ask questions. They might privately discuss the matter, for as long as 10 minutes, take at least 5 minutes to vote, and another few minutes to reconsider the vote. And voila, they would be beyond the deadline. General Fatard didn't plan to quit his filibuster until it was too late for Rishi to begin her mission. He wanted to see this case closed. He planned to see her window of opportunity slammed shut, like the loud heavy steel door to a jail cell. Rishi angrily realized that time was not on her side. Yet, she was helpless. There was nothing she could do to limit the length of Fatard's presentation, and there was nothing she could do to alter the impending time deadline. Rishi could only hope the IDCC geeks might find a way to extend it. As 0 hour loomed closer, the emptiness in the pit of her stomach ached more and more. Monday, 8:15 p.m. In the afterglow of their amorous interlude, Peter and Vanessa lay carnally entangled on the plush green rug. He heard a sound and alertly snatched his lips away from hers. He froze as still as a department store mannequin. His heart lodged in his throat. A feeling of acute emptiness burned in his chest. He attempted to swallow, but he could not. Like an erect guard dog sensing danger, Peter perched motionless and listened breathlessly. His head twisted purposefully. His scared eyes shifted from side to side. He harvested his senses and carefully surveyed his surroundings. At that moment, Peter became mortally aware of his vulnerability. He prayed Vanessa's husband, Sirius, hadn't come to make good on his threats. Although lightheaded, Peter struggled to keep his eyes focused upon the slightly cracked door. His hands trembled and his palms began to sweat. The tension shot pain to his neck and shoulders. He ached with panic and fear. The mounting apprehension of an unwarranted, untimely intrusion was too much to bear. He was going for the gun he kept in the safe. He nervously placed one hand on the floor for leverage, and slowly began to rise. By now, Vanessa had opened her eyes. Peter glanced down at her and then back at the door. Her eyes followed his. His suit jacket hung motionless. She anxiously asked,
"What's the matter?"
When he failed to respond, she asked more demandingly,
"Peter, what's going on?"
"Shish!" he snapped, unable to take his fearful eyes off of the door. The room was completely silent. After a moment, which seemed like an eternity, a gentle breeze entered the open window and blew a sheet of paper from a pile on the desk. It floated gracefully and landed on the floor with a substantial crackle. There was another sheet of paper on the floor nearby. Peter quickly deduced that the paper was the source of the sound which concerned him. His whole body went limp, as he thankfully sighed in relief. His heart eased back down into his chest and began to beat again. He took several prolonged breaths and attempted to regain his composure. Somewhat embarrassed, Peter offered his lustful willing companion a shoulder shrug. With a partially open palm that led to an outstretched pointer finger, he motioned towards the paper on the floor. Vanessa understood his silent, impotent explanation, but she did not bother to respond. Unaffected by this momentary distraction, they returned to the edge of extreme eroticism. The two of them enjoyed mauling one another. Once again, they were lost in lust and oblivious to their surroundings. Monday, 8:23 p.m. During the first few months following his return home, Harry didn't get much sleep. Catherine rode him like a witch riding a broom. Day and night, she nagged him to have sex with her. She tried every non-alcoholic enticement known to mankind, including candlelight, soft music, and sexy lingerie. There was absolutely nothing she could do to arouse him. Catherine didn't want to admit it, but deep down inside she knew that Harry refused to make love to her because he was completely repulsed by her appearance. Still, she wouldn't let him off the hook. Finally, she accused Harry of cheating with another woman. Her incessant nagging was worse than Chinese water torture. Desperate for a full night of sleep, Harry lied, and told Catherine that he had previously seen a doctor and had been found to be sexually dysfunctional. He thought that would be the end of it. However, Catherine suggested he see a specialist. She rationalized, if they could fix Bob Dole's wee-wee, surely they could help you get it up. Harry agreed to see a doctor. Catherine insisted on attending the initial consultation. In her presence, as best as he could, Harry described the situation to the specialist. Seeing Catherine, the doctor immediately understood Harry's dilemma. Man to man, he understood. For the sake of argument, the specialist conducted a thorough exam. He then compassionately confirmed that Harry was hopelessly sexually dysfunctional. He somberly explained that neither Viagra, nor any surgical procedure could remedy his problem. It's hopeless, the doctor told Catherine, with a pat on the back. Hopeless. Truth is, in an odd sort of way, Catherine was relieved by the doctor's diagnosis. After hearing it for herself, she stopped questioning her own worth as a woman. Instead, from that day forth, she told everyone who would listen about Harry's problem. Talking about it made her feel better. Harry had mixed emotions about Catherine discussing his personal business with others. The downside was that everyone she confided in looked upon him as only half a man. The upside was Catherine had stopped nagging him to have sex. She also stopped accusing him of being unfaithful. Harry took the bitter with the sweet. Thereafter, Harry slept well, albeit everyone in his dreams snickered as they passed him by. Monday, 8:31 p.m. General Rishi sat stoic, with her anxious brown eyes glued to the digital master board. It flickered and changed faster than she could flutter her long eyelashes. Still, there was no word of that deadline extension that she so desperately prayed for. Fatard stubbornly continued his unmerciful filibuster.
Yes, our mission statement says that we will aid conscientious backsliders and assist those improperly condemned to eternal life in Hades. Oh yes, and protect the souls of innocent children. But there are many ways to accomplish these things. We don't necessarily have to waltz into Chicago and start a battle that might escalate out of control.
His high-pitched voice rang out insincerely.
Sure, our hearts go out to the young people, as well as their misguided parents who are willing to make a deal with the devil to get what they want. Many of them are our family and friends. We so earnestly want to save their souls. After all, that's why most of us join SAPs. But there are limits to what we should and should not do. Violent confrontation isn't always the answer.
Fatard then tried to further minimize the need for Rishi's mission. He cited other means of accomplishing the same things. Yet, everyone in the war room was unconvinced. They knew he was just spewing chicken-hearted rhetoric.
We already do so much in keeping with our pledge. Our Advocate Outreach Division meets troubled people at their point of need. Our crisis intervention case workers provide counseling and help to hide people on the run from the society's SkipHounds.
Fatard continued with a sassy nasal tone.
We have no right to wreck a train full of people simply to kill society leaders on the way to a ceremony. That's insane. No one in their right mind would even suggest that.
Rishi was angry. That silly jerk had made her mission seem ill-conceived and called her crazy, all in one breath. She wanted to snatch off her pantyhose and stuff them in his big fat mouth. But, she knew even that wouldn't shut him up. It was never more apparent how different Fatard and Rishi were. He was educated, she was wise, he was an eternal pessimist, she was a pragmatist, he was a social worker, she was a full-fledged warrior. Fatard was afraid to die. Rishi was afraid to live. If living meant she had to surrender,